Hello and welcome to the second part of Let's Code React Native. Today we'll be talking about just very general usage of React Native and what is a view, how to use text, and basically how to draw stuff on the screen. And we'll be picking up from where we left off in the last video. And if you have not seen my first video, I do recommend you to go to my first video and check out some background information about React Native and how to set up a brand new project using React Native CLI. You can find the link in the video description. Okay, let's get started. If you followed all my instructions from the first video, you have a folder that looks kind of like this. You have all the necessary files, you have all the dependencies installed, and you have these two really identical file inside the folder. And when you run the project, you see something like this. Currently, I'm assuming we'll be building for iOS and on the Mac OS environment. You will see a slight difference in the text that's been displayed if you're using Android, but the difference is not that much. So this is where you're going to see just welcome to React Native and some subtitles under the header. Okay, so let me just leave this open and minimize this, and let me explain uh, what is going on and why it's displaying like this. Let me make this smaller. So we are viewing the LS view, and by looking at JavaScript files, we see that it's first importing React and component from React. If you're not familiar with this syntax, you really need to look at ES6 import and export syntax, because right now I'm assuming you guys already have knowledge of really quite advanced JavaScript and know about ES6, and later we'll be touching a little bit of ES7 async await structure. And if you are not familiar, I'll try to look for a tutorial for you guys, or maybe I will make one myself. But at the moment, I will leave a link in the video description that can leads you to the tutorial. Okay, so what this does is it imports this React library from the dependencies that we have installed, and also imports this named import called component, which if you are familiar with react.js, that's what you have to import every time you want to create a new custom component. And the next line, the reason it's like this is because all these things are named imports, and they are taking too much line space, and we want to put each of them by itself so it's much clearer. And also some linters, if you have really strict linter rules, it will not let you to write codes that's like have more than 100 characters. That's just too long. That goes just overflow this boundary here. And what this does is these are importing app registry, style sheet, text, and view from the React Native library. And app registry is used for when you are registering this app to the native bridge. You are just telling the native app load which to load when you run the app. Style sheet is used for styling this app. It kind of just like CSS, but some is quite different. Text, it's very straightforward. You can treat this as a label where you draw text on the screen. And view is very straightforward. If you have done native development before, everything has to be inside the view, which is the case for React Native. You have to have stuff wrapped inside the view, and then I will show you why. And if you don't do that, what kind of error you're expecting to see. So when you're writing your own code, if you see such errors, you will know what's really going on. So the first task we're going to do, we're going to take a look at this part and see what it's actually doing. So this export default class, let's code _1 extend component, can be written in a different way, but this way basically it exports whatever we have defined in here to the outside. So whenever you're going to import it, but in this case we are not importing this, so it can be written just like this. It will not break our application. So if I refresh, press Command R to reload, you'll see this message still shows nothing is broken. But later when we pull this view out of this index.ils.js, we will need to do some import export, but at the moment we are not going to worry about it, and I will put this export default back. So the first thing you see is the render function, and what it's actually doing is just like if you experience with game design, it basically tells the machine how to render this view. So what's on there, which is where, and everything. So this is a very important function. And then if you have experience with React.js, you will know that you must have a render function for a component to tell how the component is going to be placed and how to render it. So the render function return and this parenthesis. The reason we have this and the reason this syntax is really weird, it's not pure JavaScript, it's because this is using the JSX syntax. So it's a mix with JavaScript and also this tag-based syntax that you're seeing right here, which looks kind of like HTML, but it's not quite. So this is a tag-based language with JavaScript. That's the best way I can put it. So you can treat this part as just think using the HTML DOM structure. And the reason that we have this return and parentheses is because we are going to do a multi-line return. It's the same with a lot of JavaScript coding styles. And the render function, the reason we have a return is it must have a return so that the app knows what to draw. If it doesn't, then it's not going to draw anything. So if I take out this return, so if I just cut it and then refresh, it will give you error. It says the render does not return a valid React element, and because of that, you are getting an error. But if you don't want to draw anything, you can always render null. That just gives you a blank screen. It doesn't have anything. You're not drawing anything. So it's really useful if you want to show stuff and hide stuff. Sometimes you draw it, and sometimes you don't want to draw it, and then you render it null, and then that will basically take this component out of the view. So now let's restore this. So what we're seeing, the first line, if I'm here, you see that we are having a view with the style container. And inside this view, we have 3 components, all text, and you can basically see which one is which. This is welcome to React Native, and it corresponds to this line. And this one is getting started at index.ios.js. This is the second line. And the third line, press Command R to reload. This is a line break. It means go to the next line, and Command D or shake for dev menu. And so this is what we have right now. And it's easy to add new ones. So if I duplicate this and then refresh, you see that we'll have 2 lines drawn inside this big container. And to see what's actually going on, you can press Command D to bring up the dev menu, and then you can choose Show Inspector. That basically gives you a way to inspect, just like if you're doing web development in Chrome, it gives you a way to inspect how everything is laid out. So if I click here, then you will see our view. If I click here, you will see the text, and then it basically gives you information where everything is and how the size being calculated. And that's it. So this is a very useful way to inspect your views. And let's remove this extra part. Okay, so now you know where everything is, how this first view works. Let's take a look at what the heck is this style attribute. So if you're familiar with HTML, you know that this way, using this way, you are giving this this tag attribute, and in React Native it's also called props. So this style prop means that you are passing some style for this component. So for this, it means that I want you to pass whatever inside styles, the style called container, as the style. And you might wonder, okay, styles, I don't see styles anywhere, but what is actually right here in the const styles equals to style sheet dot create. Just like I mentioned before, in React Native, we're using styles kind of similar like CSS, but not exactly the same. So we have to create a special object that encloses our style using the provided style sheet class. So the way that we should create the new style is we call this style sheet.create. Is a function that returns this object that has our styles, and then you pass it an object, and inside you can just write all these separate styles you want. For example, this object you passed has a key called container, and container has a bunch of attributes, and each attribute almost uh, directly correspond to a specific CSS attribute that you could change, just like if you're coding for the web. But something is different is if you remember in CSS, for example, this justify content for this flexbox it's actually written like this. Oh. But in React Native, because this won't be a valid JavaScript JSON key unless you have single quotes or double quotes around it. So the developers at Facebook decided to use camel casing if you have more than 2 words in your style attribute. So instead of justify dash content, you have justify content with a capital C. So this is what it's different. And everything need to be, if you're passing a color, if it's going to be a string, it has to be a string format. So for example, this justify content equals to center is a string form. You pass it just like you write it just like when you are writing normal JavaScript codes. When you're doing objects, you quote it using a single quote or double quote. It's whatever you like, but I prefer single quotes for my strings. And if you have a number, for example, this font size and this flex value, you just type it as a number. So if you do it as a string, it will give you an error message that says no, you cannot do that. So now we go back to the style equals to, and then this. What is this? Why we need this curly braces around our styles.container? At this moment, you probably already understand why we are having this styles.container, because styles is whatever we have created here, and then dot container is basically accessing the container key inside our style sheet, which is this part. Easy, isn't it? But why we have this, right? Because if you know, let me just just make it double line. So you can have a prop equals to 1, 2, 3. If you did web development, you know that this is a valid attribute or property, because I gave a string 1, 2, 3 to this property, and if I refresh this, there will be no errors because it's not an error. It's totally valid. But why this need the curly braces? It's because this is a JSX syntax, and you want to evaluate something as its value, so you just cannot write it like this. So if you write style equals to this, it will give you a bunch of error. It says JSX value should be either an expression or quoted text. So it's very, very straightforward, this error. So it means that you have to give an expression, and the way that expression is formatted is using this curly brackets. So it means that when the compiler is going to compile this code, it knows that, okay, I see this as an expression, I evaluate it into a value, and then put it inside here. Usually, if you're really into inspecting what's really going on, which I will do that in a later video, I will show you what is really going on after this part is being evaluated. So let's refresh. Okay, so that's done. And then the same goes with styles.welcome, styles.introductions, and styles.introductions. And just for the fun of it, let's modify some styles and see how they react here. So if I give a so if I modify this welcome, if I give a color red, then you see the entire text turns red. If I give it blue, it turns into blue. Or I can give a hex value. Pretty nice purplish color. Or you can give a RGB A value or RGB value. So if I give 120, 0.20, if you give a RGB A value, it's opacity 0.4. Yeah, this is how the styling works, and it's not really limited to that. You can give so for example, you can increase the font. Oh, oops. You can increase the font size to 30 points, and you could even change the font family if you want, but we will talk about that later. So this is a really just a simple explanation of how everything is working once you load up this sample application. And in our next application, we will start really coding this application very seriously. I will going to tell you how to pull this entire logic out into a separate file, because to my experience, it's always very helpful if you just leave these two files almost blank, just leave a couple of imports, and then have all your other components, all your views, all your logic, all your codes in a separate folder as their separate file. So it's make it much easier for you to debug, and if problem arises. Oh, before I finish, let me show you at this stage what if you're uh, add your own stuff to it. I do encourage you, if you want to try, you can try to add some more text uh, to it, and then some of the errors that you might see, and how to resolve them. So one of the errors that you might see if you're trying to add stuff to this view is simply so here this error is very useful because it basically tells you this raw text must be wrapped in a text component. So this is what's causing it. If you're writing text inside JSX, you must wrap it using a text component. So even if you, for example, if you want to, I don't want all this, I just want welcome, and then you refresh, and even you wrap it with a view, it's still not going to work. You have to wrap it with a text for it to show up, because internally it basically draws a view and then draws this label that includes your text. If you just have the text, React Native has no idea what kind of component you are going to use, so it's telling you to wrap it with a text. And the second error you might going to see is this. So for example, if I'm just so after all this, let me just get it back to normal. So yeah, right? So I want to have this welcome again after everything, and then I refresh. It gives me this error. It says adjacent JXS must be wrapped in a closing tag. So what it actually tells you is you have to have everything almost as a parent of a view or view tag, because if you have this, then this is your main view, and then after it drawn this main view, then you also want to draw this text label. Then React Native really don't really know where to put this text, and also in return for your component, it's really recommended that you only return one parent, like one root component, which is if I did remove this, then the component I'm returning is just this view. It might has how many children, but React Native doesn't care. It will still render that children. But if you return two root elements, then you're gonna have a problem. So the way to resolve this is you can just do whatever the error tells you. You can have a view that wrap this two view together. It's totally valid. Then you see that the styles get messed up because in order for that to work, you need to modify this. You need to add some styles to this root view to make it bigger. So the easiest way to resolve this is just to put this, oops, inside, and then refresh. Okay, so that's for today, and I will try to make another video very soon. And happy coding. Bye.